You're listening to Founder Sessions, a podcast that helps people relate to the reality of startup life. My name is Carl Murray and I am a startup nerd. In each session, I will chat to entrepreneurs about their ideas, their stories, and the challenges they face throughout their journey. This session could not be possible without our good friends at Northstar Ventures. Northstar Ventures is a VC firm investing in innovative solutions to help solve the most pressing societal issues we have today. They are a pre-Series A investor with ticket sizes between £100,000 to £1 million. They focus on building long-term relationships with their portfolio clients to see them through to exit. To learn more about Northstar Ventures, check out the link in the description of this session. Hi everyone and welcome back to Founder Sessions. Joining me today is Pete Daykin, the CEO and co-founder of Wordnerds. Pete, welcome to the podcast. How are you doing?
Yeah, not too bad, Carl. Thanks very much for having me.
Great to have you on. And Pete, I've known about yourself and Wordnerds for quite a while now. I ran a past podcast where I spoke to your co-founder, Steve Dell. Great podcast if you want to check that one out as well. But never had the pleasure to chat with you. So great to have you on the podcast today. And we're just going to talk about your journey to Wordnerds, what Wordnerds is, and then we're going to talk about Wordnerds' investment with Northstar Ventures. So let's start at the very beginning, Pete. When did your entrepreneurial journey start?
I think when I was in my last year at uni, I didn't really know what I wanted to do. And I mean, how the hell anybody age 18 to 21 is supposed to know anything about the world, never mind enough about the world to know what they want to dedicate the rest of their career and life to is beyond me. And I had no idea. I knew what I didn't want to do, and that was move to London and become an accountant or a management consultant like every other bugger that I knew. Not that that's a bad thing. There's plenty of fantastic accountants and management consultants. It just wasn't for me. It would have driven me crazy. And I also felt pretty strongly that I'd sort of moved away to uni and I wanted to come back to the Northeast where I'd grown up and I wanted to do something, and I knew it wanted to be creating something, but I didn't really know what. At the time, I was super into football. I say football, I'm a Sunderland fan, so you can argue amongst yourselves whether or not that is always football, and certainly at the end of the 1990s, whether it was football. And I was really involved in the fanzine there, and so the starting point was basically sort of coming back up to it to work full-time on the fanzine, everything from producing magazines, selling them on street corners, putting buses onto the game, printing T-shirts and selling them. And actually, as a grounding for entrepreneurialism, it was a brilliant nursery for me. It kind of taught me everything from tax returns to, profit and loss and managing stock and managing staff to a lesser degree. And it was a good little kind of experience for what came next.
And I guess when you were there as well, you love Sunderland, you love the thing. So what you were doing was just a love, really, and we just learning entrepreneurial stuff on the side, essentially. Because if you love it, then you're doing well at it.
I mean, let's be really clear about this. I was in my early 20s, and so I was spending most of my time listening to bands, drinking beer, chasing girls, and running up and down the country, having a ridiculously good time. So, yeah, look, there was lots going on in my life that wasn't work related, but I think that's appropriate at that age, right? And I think one of the reasons I didn't want to move to London and become a professional at that time was because I had some growing up to do and I had some enjoying myself to do. And once I got all of that stuff out of my system, I could concentrate on learning stuff and actually being a useful member of society rather than being a absolute melt like I was at the time.
Hey, it's life experience though, isn't it? So what was the gap between the fanzine and starting up the agency, Daykin and Story?
Yeah, so I was happily producing printed magazines in those days and doing some freelance stuff, titles like 442 and Total Football and writing for things like the Sunday Sun. And over the course of a year, we saw circulations of our magazine dipping from, the tens of thousands to single figures, thousands. And basically football fans were really early adopters of the internet. The guy I was doing the fanzine with and I were looking at it. We bought a book called Learn HTML in a Weekend and learned how to code up a really, really shoddy website. And within a few weeks, we were getting, 60, 70, 80,000 visitors a week to this website that was, frankly pathetic. But we were kind of like, oh my God, this is the future. I kind of got really interested in the internet as a means of articulating voices of people that previously hadn't really had their voice articulated. I mean, it seems strange for young bucks like you, but when I grew up, the only people that could really get their point of view across were people that worked for companies that had printing presses that cost hundreds of thousands of pounds, or people that worked for the TV or the radio. And the whole kind of fanzine movement was almost like a precursor to blogging and this idea that you can be just a person on their own with an interest in something and not necessarily a professional journalist, but be a subject matter expert and have a legitimate opinion and articulate that however punk or rough that was, however poorly produced, however ridiculous it looked, however badly spelt and, appallingly punctuated it was. Actually, the content of what you were talking about was great. And this was kind of intoxicating for me. I got really into the idea of websites. At the time, I looked around and everybody was kind of getting to grips with this new technology. So I got a credit card, bought a suit and a computer, and set up a web agency.
Brilliant. That's the back in the day sort of story, isn't it? That is like internet day one sort of stuff. That's brilliant. And from there, it just grew and grew and grew. So talk to me about the times at Daykin and Story. How were those experiences?
Yeah, so we had a couple of agencies. The first one was called Azure, and it was based over in Sunderland. And we had a really young team of, really talented individuals, designers, developers, people who've gone on to do some amazing things. And we were all learning together, and we had a right laugh. We were probably less good at the business side and really interested in the technology. And we were ambitious, but not in a kind of commercial way. We were interested in the creative process and the building process and learning a lot. And again, we had a right laugh. We were pretty informal. We had kind of profit share things going on. Not that we ever made a load of profit, but it was good fun. And that kind of took me sort of into my 30s, and I sort of at that stage got married and started thinking about having kids and realized it was probably the time to stop messing around at things and to start actually kind of taking life a bit more seriously and trying to earn some money and provide for a family. And at that point, we merged with another agency and formed Daykin and Story. We moved blinking into the bright lights of Gateshead from Sunderland and set up in what was the Open University building that's now Proto. And we already had a great team. We were lucky enough to merge with a company called Virtuoso, who also had a fantastic team. And after the usual kind of rubbings along of whenever two businesses come together, there's always a little bit of fallout. But once we kind of got over that, we started kind of doing some really good stuff. We got some amazing clients. We were working for people like the Northeast LEP and some sort of private businesses that were really cool and really, some great clients. And it all was going swimmingly. We were making money. We were getting better. When Nissan put on a challenge day with Sunderland Software City, and we'd been trying to get into Nissan for ages. So we rock along to Nissan thinking, right, what's this challenge? We walk into a room, it's full of, data consultancies from London, people from Malaysia, teams with, rooms full of data scientists and very brainy people that were much better resourced than a poxy little Northeast design and build agency. And the problem that Nissan had was, if you buy a new car from Nissan and it breaks down on, in the first few weeks of having it, and quite a few do, because if there's a problem in the build of the car, it usually shows pretty early. Because of their dealer network, they don't find out about it at the factory for about 2 weeks by the time the dealers sorted it all out and diagnosed the problem and fixed it and then put it in the QA database. And their issue is when you're producing a car every 29 seconds, if there's a problem on the line that's going into all of these cars, that's a lot of potential warranty claims coming out of the factory. And so their contention was, look, if you've got a Twitter account or Facebook or something like that, you just bought a new car and it breaks down, you're probably going to go on Twitter and slag Nissan off. Happily, I should say, by the way, that it happens very rarely, but when it happens, it can be kind of very expensive. But the problem that they had was a lot of their brands were things like a leaf or a note, words in common everyday parlance. And if you do a keyword search for problems with a leaf, you're going to get things like railways not working because they're on the tracks, or Leaf FM not loading on your MacBook, or whatever it is. But it's not people complaining about new cars because there's very, very few of them, and it's needle in a haystack territory. So it was a 48-hour challenge. We were looking at this this problem. We'd seen some of the advances in natural language processing and artificial intelligence, and we did the usual agency thing of just kind of researching some of that and seeing what was out there. And we saw that there was some green shoots of possibility there, but it wasn't really mature enough to do what Nissan needed it to do. At the same time, I'd met in a pub a guy called Steve Erdl, who you mentioned before, who's now my co-founder. And Steve, as well as being like the nicest guy in the world and an impossibly tall Scotsman, I mean, seriously, he's a freak. He looks like something from north of the wall. Steve is a corpus linguist and spent his time studying Victorian ghost literature. I mean, I shit you not, that was a real job. And looking at who'd written what manuscripts based on their linguistic fingerprint, and knew all of these like really incredible things about the structure of language and the way that different words are used and their roles in the sentence. And I kind of rang him, at the end of day one of this 48-hour challenge, sort of saying like, look, remember me, we had a great chat about some of your linguistic stuff in the pub. It's been swimming around my head. I think I've got something that you can help with. If I can get some AI to parse sentences on Twitter and say, this is where the verbs are, this is where the nouns are, and all this kind of thing, can you tell me a QA problem with a car as distinct from all of this other noise on Twitter, from the structure of the language, not the vocabulary? Because people say things like, my gearbox is goosed, or my suspension is toast, stuff that you wouldn't necessarily think about kind of listening for. And Steve, bearing in mind he didn't know me from Adam, Steve sat up all night. He wrote 21 syntactic rules that you could apply to this AI output, and gave me 3 examples of things for Nissan. 2 of them looked like QA issues with cars, but weren't. They include things like sarcasm and people going saying the opposite of what they meant. One of them didn't look like a QA issue, but was. And we pitched this to Nissan the next day. It was probably the worst pitch in the history of the world. I think our opening lines went something along the lines of, you asked us to look at your data, we didn't. You asked us to show you software, we haven't got any. But we've got this really half-arsed idea about how we think really new AI and really old corpus linguistics can help you solve your problem. And then Steve pitched them this stuff. And nobody was more shocked than us when we won the challenge day, and Nissan gave us, I think, 25 grand to build a proof of concept. We spent 10 months in arguing with their legal team about who owns the IP for this, which is something that I'm really delighted we did now. A few years on, now we've got a business that's doing this. And then we kind of started on this journey of teaching computers to understand humans on the internet. And literally, it just snowballed from there. Very quickly, people got wind of what we were doing. The proof of concept worked really well. Nissan gave us some more money to build it out. Other big brands that we couldn't get near as a regional digital agency, started contacting us, going, oh, hey, we hear you're doing some stuff about words and this problem. We've got this problem that's slightly different. Can you help us with that? Blah, 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 blah. And we made all of the rookie mistakes about, let's build a separate product to help you with your problem. And all of these things that, looking back, are absolutely ridiculous and we totally shouldn't have done. But we knew very early on that we were onto something that was different, that was higher value than the stuff we were doing as an agency. And pretty quickly it started to get exciting.
That's a brilliant story, and it's almost the case of right place, right time, and knowing the right people. You were at that Nissan Sunderland Software City Day. You were pitched this problem, and you knew straight away, oh, I know a guy, Steve. He knows words and stuff. He might help with this. It seems like, do you feel that, like right place, right time, and that's how it went from there?
Yeah, and it's easy to put some of these things down to serendipity, but actually, I think one of the the Northeast is a small region, and that is both an asset and a challenge. And one of the things that I think we suffer from is we don't have many big companies here. A lot of innovation falls out of large companies because there are problems that they come across that they can't solve, and people working there see opportunities in those problems and build out solutions to them. We were really fortunate that Sunderland Software City, which is an amazing organization that does not get the recognition it deserves, recognized that and started doing basically problem brokerage. They started approaching large organizations and saying, hey, tell us some of your problems. We'll put that in front of a bunch of people, including SMEs in the Northeast, and try and find people who've got ideas to solve them. Because without that happening, without them correcting that market failure, we would never have known that that was even an issue to fix. And when, as an agency, when we looked at that problem for the first time, we knew absolutely nothing about it at all. We had no pedigree in text analytics or anything like that. But because of that, we were mercifully unconstrained by the usual thinking that people working in that line have, are subject to. We hadn't been trained in the same way. That probably limited what we thought was possible. We could start with a blank sheet of paper and be really creative about the solution. And then it's just about finding people who have different and complementary skill sets and ending up working at the intersection of disciplines, corpus linguistics and AI, meant that even now there's nobody that we know of in the market working at precisely the intersect we're in. And that happened completely by chance, but also a little bit by design. And I think that's sometimes overlooked in some of these stories. That makes it all just sound like, hey, I just happened to be there and it was a happy coincidence. It wasn't.
Yeah.
A lot of people worked really hard to manufacture that situation so idiots like me could be in front of big businesses like Nissan.
Yeah. You got a big market share very early. And even to this day, is there any company challenging Wordnerds for that market share, or you just the outrunner on that?
Oh, yeah. So there's lots of people in our space, and we're by no means the biggest text analytics tool, but we're certainly the only people in the market that does it the way that we do it. If you want flexibility in text analytics, if you want to listen to literally anything on a day-by-day basis, if your CEO says, what does our data tell us about this thing, and you've never looked at it before, with Wordnerds, we can tell you answers to that in seconds and minutes rather than weeks and months, which AI alone approaches kind of take. But there's much better funded, much cleverer people in this marketplace than us who are doing brilliant things as well. But in our niche, we are very different.
Yeah, so cool to see, especially, being Northeast lads like we are, seeing a Northeast company doing big things on a big scale. So talk to me about that transition from the agency to Wordnerds. How did, the people are the core of it. What happened with the people? Did they join Wordnerds, or was there a bit of a, thank you for your time, sort of thing?
Yeah, so it was one of those things. It was a project that started in the corner of the office and just started getting bigger and bigger and bigger, and more people were getting roped into it. And you could kind of see week by week, particularly some of our more technical people got really interested in the problem, and they were kind of looking over people's shoulders going, oh, that's kind of interesting. And, when a web developer or a software engineer would sit down with a linguist and they would talk through a problem, kind of magic happened and there was a sort of crackle in the air. So we knew there was something going on. And then when the bigger brands started kind of approaching us and getting involved and wanting to sign contracts and all of that kind of thing, we kind of knew relatively quickly that this was something that, as an agency founder, I probably didn't have the energy for. And my original plan was to find a CEO to run it, separate it out as its own thing, retain some ownership of it, and just kind of cut it free from the agency and see what happened to it. And I spoke to a couple of people, but couldn't quite find the right person at the right time. There's some amazing people that we spoke to, but they were just probably too far on in their career and wanted too much money. We couldn't afford them, or conversely, were really talented and stuff like that, but had no experience kind of doing that stuff, which I kind of really wanted. And I ended up, somebody recommended that I go and speak to a guy called Paul Smith, who ran the Ignite Accelerator program in the Northeast. And I cold called him one day and said, I'm thinking about this thing. Can I have a pint? And he said, yeah, no problem. So went out for a pint with me. And I basically told him what my plan was. And in the course of 15 brutal minutes, he completely disabused me of any idea that I had that I knew what I was doing. And he told me a load of really, really useful things and gave me some great advice, starting with just go and speak to some investors about it and see what they say. And I did. And, we were fortunate because of European funding to have something called the Northeast Fund, which is basically venture capital that has to be spent in the Northeast. And there's a bunch of great VCs that run those funds. And one of them is a company called Northstar. And I met a guy called Rick from Northstar. And he's a super approachable guy, really nice fella, really smart, knows what he's doing. And I went to speak to Rick, and I kind of showed him this sort of what at the time was a half-assed product with a little bit of traction, and explained our vision for it and told him about the story so far. And he was really encouraging. He said, look, this is really good. This is exactly the kind of thing we would fund. Go away, do me some business plans, give me some things to think about, and come back and pitch it to our investment board. So I scrabbled around speaking to some other people, spoke to some other Northeast entrepreneurs who'd been through that process, found that there is a network of founders out there that love helping each other in the Northeast. And, some guys from Shields who ran a gym app were like, oh, hey, we got funding last year. Here's all of our spreadsheets with all of the figures on that helped us get the funding. Just take that and do your own version of it. It was like, oh, that was super helpful. Bunch of other people gave me a ton of advice, and we, put together a pitch deck, put together the business plan. I have to say, like Steve, my co-founder, is a writer. He writes about Scottish mythology and all this kind of thing. He writes fiction. Our business plan was the single greatest piece of fiction since James Joyce wrote Ulysses. It was just complete bullshit. And none of it turned out to be true or all of that kind of thing. But going through the process was really interesting. And it was wrong in so many ways, but it almost it didn't matter. It articulated our vision for the idea. And we took this to Northstar and we pitched it to their investment board. They asked some very reasonable questions and prodded some holes in it, but I think they understood the opportunity and the potential, and they really bought into kind of Steve and his expertise, and obviously the fact that I'd run a business already was kind of a plus. Rick came back a couple of days later and said, "Look, we're really happy to fund this. We'll get 20% of the business. We'll offer you 20% of the business for 250 grand." But we want you running it, and we want you to close the agency. So I went back to the agency, and bear in mind, the agency was doing great. We had a great team. We were growing. We were, making money, not huge money, but it's agencies, kind of margins are tight and it's really competitive. But we were doing great, and so there's kind of a lot of hand wringing, like, what do we do? What do we not do? I spoke to some of my senior people at the agency. The problem with an agency is there's no asset there. All of the value is wrapped up in the relationships between usually the founders and the customers. And without the founders, the customers drift off. And yeah, you've got some contracts and all that kind of thing. But it's not really worth very much. We worked out pretty quickly that our biggest asset was the team that we'd built. And that team, sadly, was going to be too big for a startup because we were at about 26, 28 people in the agency at that stage. And 250 grand does not kind of equate to a team that big. So we spoke to a few people. I offered a couple of people in the agency. I said, look, just take it and do it. And they were like, no, we want to come and work at Wordnerds, which I think was a good indication that we were on the right thing. So we took the decision to close the agency. And I went back to Rick and I said, look, we'll close the agency, but instead of doing it over 2 years like you suggested, if we're going to do it, let's just be really clear about that and kill it as quickly as we can. And try and keep the team together and try and take the core skill sets that we need for Wordnerds across from the people that we already know, like, and trust. And Rick said, yeah, really down with that. That's brilliant. I said, that's good news because I need more money to do it. And Rick said, well, look, if what you're saying is on day one, you're going to have a team that already knows how to work together, that's a much more investable idea with higher potential. So for the same equity, we'll double the money. Will give you 500 grand. And also I think you'll need more cash than that. So I'm going to go out and help you find some angels as well. So Rick helped us find some angels. We were very clear that we initially started off wanting, diversity in our board and all of this kind of thing. But actually, when we looked at it, and we still do, but when we looked at it, what was most important were people who had started, scaled, and sold software businesses in the Northeast. It is a different region. We were making this shit up as we go along. We didn't know what we were doing. We were probably making terrible decisions, and we wanted some adults in the room. And via Northstar, they helped introduce us to some people who had done it and were still doing it and continue to this day to do brilliant software businesses from the Northeast. So people like, Jared and Paul Callahan, who, Leighton Group Sales Cycle Communicator, they've got a litany of fantastic businesses, software businesses behind them. Our chair is Stu Kibbe, who runs Opencast, who is, a software company based in kind of Gateshead. Kev Beals, who has started, scaled and sold Test Factory and now Refract, a serial software entrepreneur, sort of steeped in that. He's not from the Northeast, but he's very much steeped in the Northeast kind of scene at the minute. And we surrounded ourselves by people that actually knew what they were doing, which was really helpful. And we raised 650 grand. That allowed us to take 10 people from Daykin and Story across to Wordnerds. Everybody else, we had two principles. We didn't close the doors till we knew what was happening with all the projects that we'd signed up to with our customers, and that everybody who we couldn't take the Wordnerds got another job. We were honest and open about it. Obviously, wasn't great news for the people we weren't taking across. It was a pretty horrific time. They were all brilliant. They all got jobs. It took 3 weeks for them to get jobs. I mean, tech sector talent. We don't need to talk about the dearth of talent in the tech sector generally, but they all got pay rises for going, and I'm sure they weren't necessarily happy about it, but it definitely assuaged my guilt. And it meant that relatively quickly, we were able to start on Wordnerds while we wrapped up the projects at Daykin and Story. And that was kind of June 2019. And we started with, I think, 7 or 8K of revenue per month, monthly recurring revenue. And within a year, we were up to 50 grand a month. And, just that kind of meteoric startup software rise. We thought we were geniuses. We thought software as a service was so much better than the agency model. And then COVID hit and it all went to shit.
Wow. I know you've said like you were making stuff on the spot, doing all this stuff, but I think for a blueprint to do from one business to the other, hard stop, like you said, I think that's the blueprint for it. That's on a human level, that is the best way to do it, because I think people just be like, ooh, bag of gold, let's just stop everything, forget everybody, and let's just chase the bag of gold. But the way you've laid it out there, I think that was the perfect transition, if I do say so myself. And yeah, COVID messed up everyone, didn't it?
Yeah, I'm happy to say we're getting back to where we were previously now, and actually sales have all started again as the world's opened up, and we're very confident about the year ahead. But yeah, look, there's no elegant way to close a business, particularly an agency. There's winners and losers in every situation, and that's horrific when it's not their fault, when people had worked really hard and we'd sold them the agency dream and they'd really contributed to building something that had nothing wrong with it, and then all of a sudden it gets pulled from underneath them. So it's really hard, but at the same time, when an opportunity presents itself and it turns out that it's a big opportunity, I think you owe it to yourself and the team to kind of to go for that. And I'm getting on, and I think I reached the point in my life where I figured I don't want to be in 10 years time thinking about what I didn't do. I want to be thinking about what I did, and that's potentially, people might think that's selfish or whatever, but I think you've got to do what's interesting as well. I think 15 years running an agency, it was great, but if I had to write another proposal about, redesigning a website, I think I would have had to poke out my own eyes with a rusty spoon.
Brilliant. And we spoke about Northstar, they've had a crucial role in Wordnerds. They've set you up for future goals and ambitions. So what are the future goals and ambitions for maybe yourself and Wordnerds?
Look, I can't speak highly enough of Northstar and of Rick. When COVID hit, we had a pipeline was great. We had a bunch of people about to close. They all said, look, really sorry, COVID, we're not spending any money for 6 months. And our whole sales pipeline just collapsed. And I rang Rick one Wednesday night, and I sort of said, Rick, what happens if we don't sell anything for 12, 18 months? And his response was, this is when we get to prove our value to you. You've already proved your value to us. We really love Wordnerds. Your team is great. We love the mission. We've got £1 million ring fenced for you. You know, we're not going to see the lights go out. We can do it as loan notes. We can do it as, debt round. We can do it as equity. Whatever you guys want, we'll be here for you. We'll make sure you come out the other side. And he's been good to his word. They've been hugely supportive and fantastically helpful all the way through. I had a board meeting yesterday, and Rick and Stu and the other members of the board, we come to them with all of our problems. We're just totally open with them. We're like, look, we don't know how to do this, we don't know how to do that. And they spend their life just basically connecting us with people and giving us solutions to things they've already been through, or they've, in Rick's case, they've seen other businesses go through that we're going at for the first time. And that's invaluable. The money was really important, but the most valuable thing they've brought us is the experience and the expertise. And that's saved us so much in stupid ideas that Steve and I have had that we thought were genius, that they've told us was absolutely stupid, and then why, and then been right. So no, they've been great. I think where we are now is we're approaching that magic £1 million ARR figure. We're trying to get our metrics back up after COVID to something that VCs will find exciting and interesting. We're speaking to Ignite about potentially doing an accelerator, a raising accelerator with them. They've got Ignite have got a fantastic network of investors and lots of expertise there. And we love leveraging the expertise of the Northeast sort of tech scene generally. And yeah, if we can get these figures up, I think 2023 for us will probably have what is now a kind of seed round, but what used to be kind of early Series A. So, a decent sized raise. We know much more about our business. COVID made us kind of grow up. It made us put in place management teams and proper systems and processes, and we understand the sales process and the replicable sales model much, much better, and all of that kind of thing. And we're in good shape. And Northstar will very much be part of the next stage of our evolution, as will hopefully the rest of our investors as well, because we really rely on them.
Yeah, it's so brilliant. And from what I've heard about Northstar and speaking to Heckler as well, is it's just that support throughout, from start to not even to finish, because they want you to keep going. That's how brilliant they are. It's just great to have in the Northeast as well, just someone that gives a damn about your company and wants to not just put money in, but put people in there to challenge you on ideas and help you grow that way.
Yeah, no, 100%. And a lot of other founders I speak to tell me how lucky we are and how rare it is. And I know this sounds like an advert for them, and I'm blowing smoke up their arses. And honestly, it's genuine experience. And I have no reason to kind of, to promote them over anybody else. We've just found them great. And the other guys as well, by the way.
Brilliant. No, that's a brilliant story, Pete. And lastly, what I like to do on the podcast is I like to get the guests to pass on some lessons, some words of wisdom, whatever it may be, to future entrepreneurs. So, Pete, for you, what advice would you like to pass on?
I don't know whether I'm qualified to give advice. We're still making it up. This whole thing could still kind of fall apart tomorrow. I think I read a guy I very much respect on Twitter, and I won't give him his name. He put this thing about, in the 20s you should learn, in your 30s you should do, in your 40s you should advise, in your 50s, and all this kind of thing. And it sounded really good. Like, my problem is, like, every 5 years I realize what an idiot I was 5 years ago, and for me it's about continuing to learn. The best thing about Wordnerds, if Wordnerds packs in tomorrow and we make no money from it, it's been a hell of a journey, and I've learned an absolute ton, and I'm so much better prepared for whatever comes next. And the whole evolution of fanzine to web design company to digital agency to software company, was always about looking at what the tech stack was doing, looking at how things were changing, learning new technologies and applying all of the learning to things that are continuing to come. And I think as long as you do that, you'll always be relevant, you'll always see opportunity, and you'll always be excited in the work that you do. And if you're excited, you can do great work. So just keep learning, and don't be afraid to articulate your ignorance. Don't be afraid to reach out to people, particularly in the Northeast. People are delighted to help you, and people know so much. They're so brilliant and so clever, and people have such great experience, and they'll pass that on if you just ask them to. So I spent too many years trying to do it on my own in a room in Sunderland, and the day I started asking other people for help and learning stuff was the day things started to just improve dramatically for us. And that's probably what little advice I'm qualified to give.
No, that's brilliant, Pete. And like I said, the story's inspirational in itself. Pete, thank you for coming on Founder Sessions. Absolute pleasure to have you on. Very last thing, would you like to tell the people where they can connect with you, what they should check out?
Yeah, no, thanks for having me. It's been a real pleasure. Obviously you can find me on Twitter at Pete Daykin, or just go to the Wordnerds website. Just Google Wordnerds and you'll find us. And always happy to hear from interested and interesting people in and outside of the Northeast.
Brilliant. And once again, Pete, thank you very much. This has been Founder Sessions with Pete Daykin. Thank you very much.